I walked down the aisle with a split lip, then my groom tried to steal my father's $50 million company, and I reached into my bouquet instead. The aisle stretched before me, a path paved with white lilies, my split lip a stark crimson against the pristine. As my groom's laughter echoed, I knew this wasn't just my wedding day, it was the battlefield where my father's legacy would either be lost or reclaimed. I moved slowly, a bride walking toward her fate with a fresh wound splitting my lip, while my future husband, Liam Blackwood, chuckled softly from the altar. His amusement was a private joke, a cruel prelude to the moment he planned to offer me a pen for signing away not just my freedom, but my father's thriving multi-million-dollar enterprise. I had other plans. I snapped the pen in two and reached into my bouquet. 300 faces filled the ornate cathedral, yet not a single pair of eyes dared to meet mine directly. It's an unspoken rule in rooms where immense power and vast wealth intersect, people instinctively know which gaze is safe, and which might invite unwanted scrutiny. Senators, influential investors, socialites whose names graced the wings of hospitals and the endowments of universities, all of them found safe havens for their attention. Their gazes drifted to the shimmering stained glass windows, to the pages of their programs, to the elegant columns of white lilies lining the aisle. Anywhere but the blossoming bruise on my left cheekbone, or the laceration on my lower lip, a mark my trembling makeup artist, tears silently streaming down her own face, had tried valiantly to conceal just 90 minutes earlier. The organ swelled with a solemn tune by Bach. I kept to the deliberate pace I'd rehearsed. Liam Blackwood stood waiting at the altar, resplendent in his custom black tuxedo, observing my approach with the casual arrogance of a monarch receiving tribute. He was possessive, almost bored, already anticipating the conclusion of this elaborate charade. At 38, he was dark-haired, with the kind of striking good looks that translated beautifully in photographs but somehow drained your energy in person. He exuded the unshakable self-assurance of a man who had never once in his privileged life encountered a consequence he couldn't simply pay his way out of. As I ascended the altar steps, Liam leaned toward his nearest groomsman, making no effort to lower his voice. Why would he? This entire event, in his estimation, was still his domain. She needed a little reminder of who's in charge before the ink dries, he murmured, loud enough for a ripple of laughter to spread through the front rows. It was an easy, delighted sound, the laughter of those who had inhabited such opulent circles their entire lives, who understood implicitly that cruelty, when delivered by the right man in the right tuxedo, was merely another facet of his charm. His mother, Eleanor Blackwood, sat in the front pew, clad in raw ivory silk. Her lace-gloved fingers pressed delicately to her lips, her eyes shining with what, from a distance, might have been mistaken for maternal pride. I knew better. I had observed that particular glint up close for the past 8 months. Liam took my hand, his grip precisely calibrated, hard enough to convey his intent through my silk glove, yet no harder. He was always so meticulous in these subtle assertions of control. He pressed a gold pen into my palm. It was heavy, monogrammed, the kind of instrument chosen specifically to make one feel the profound weight of what they were about to sign. Registry first, darling, he whispered, inclining his head toward the small table beside Father Michael's podium. Let's make it official, before God. The pen touched the pristine paper. I held it there for precisely 1 second. Then, I snapped it in half. The crack was sharper, louder than I had anticipated, clean like a brittle branch breaking underfoot. The ensuing silence was the first truly authentic quiet the room had experienced all morning. Liam's condescending smile didn't vanish, it simply froze, hardening like something setting into a permanent, brittle shape. I prefer, I stated, my voice clear in the sudden stillness, to write my own endings. I reached into my bouquet, a cascade of white peonies, Eleanor's choice, just as everything else in this wedding had been her choice. From its depths, I retrieved a silver flash drive. I watched, with a cold satisfaction, as Liam Blackwood's face drained of color, turning the pallid shade of old ash. My name is Isabella Vance. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been the chief executive officer of Vailtech. This is the technology company my father, Dr. Arthur Vance, meticulously built over 27 years, transforming it from a humble research lab in his Palo Alto garage into a $50 million enterprise. Today, Vailtech boasts 41 active patents in enterprise infrastructure software and holds government contracts across 3 continents. My father passed away 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, claimed him by February. It was a timeline that offered no space for lingering goodbyes, only urgent, poignant discussions about what truly mattered. In our last meaningful conversation, as he lay in the hospital, he gripped my hand and said, "The company is yours, ISA. Not just because you're my daughter, but because you are the only one I trust to lead it with the vision and integrity it deserves. Promise me you will scrutinize every single document before you sign anything. When men rush you to sign, it's because they fear what you might discover if you read it first." I made that promise to him. I've lived with that promise, a constant echo, almost every day since. The Blackwoods entered my life 6 months after my father's funeral, at a charity gala I nearly skipped. I was consumed by quarterly reports, still grappling with the full scope of my inheritance, existing on 4 hours of sleep a night, fueled by grief and stale coffee. Liam was introduced to me by a mutual investor friend, and I must admit, in that initial encounter, he presented himself impeccably. He was charming, attentive, sufficiently knowledgeable about the tech sector to engage in a genuine conversation, and, most importantly, he seemed utterly and completely captivated by me, Isabella, the person. Afterward, I convinced myself that his interest was authentic. The first subtle warning sign was easy enough to dismiss. 3 months into our courtship, Liam casually mentioned over dinner that his family's investment firm, Blackwood Capital, had long admired Vailtech. He mused that combining our resources could create powerful synergies. I shrugged it off, filing it under, "Of course he thinks this way, he's a businessman." And I moved on. The second flag was a little more challenging to rationalize. 6 months into our relationship, Eleanor, who had by then become a regular presence at Sunday lunches and holiday dinners, always impeccably dressed, always precisely warm, asked me, with what seemed like genuine concern, if I found the CEO role too much to bear alone. I assured her I had an excellent team. She responded, "Naturally, but a company like your father's deserves to be in the right hands for the long term. Have you truly considered what that means?" I told her it meant my hands. She smiled serenely and gracefully changed the subject. The third red flag was the one I should have immediately acted upon. I didn't. 8 months ago, 4 months before our engagement was announced, I returned from a product summit in Singapore to find, buried deep within a lengthy chain of forwarded emails that my assistant, Zara, had marked, FYI, not urgent, a meeting request. It was for a discussion between Blackwood Capital's legal team and 3 members of my own board of directors. The subject line read, Vailtech Strategic Alignment, Preliminary Discussion. There was no agenda attached, no explanation for why Blackwood Capital's lawyers were meeting with my board members without my knowledge. And there was no way to read that sentence without my stomach clenching into a tight knot. Standing in my kitchen at 11 p.m., battling jet lag and sipping cold coffee, I tried to reassure myself. There has to be a reasonable explanation. Liam's firm has clients that overlap with ours. Board members take calls. This could be absolutely nothing. The next morning, I called my CEO, Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been with my father since the company's 8th year and possessed a poker face that was impossible to read unless he actively chose to reveal something. He told me he'd heard about the meeting secondhand, through another board member, and had simply assumed I'd been informed. I wasn't informed, I stated flatly. Marcus was silent for a moment. Isabella, he said, his tone unusually cautious, how much do you really know about Blackwood Capital's current portfolio holdings? I knew, suddenly, not nearly enough. Over the next 2 days, I sought answers through a trusted contact at a financial research firm, a brilliant woman named Clara Jensen, MBA, who had been discreetly tracking private equity movements in the mid-market tech sector for over 11 years. What Clara revealed to me during a very long phone call caused my hands to do that peculiar thing they do when something is profoundly wrong. They went completely still, as if my body understood, before my brain did, that any motion would be the wrong response. Blackwood Capital had, over the past 14 months, been systematically acquiring minority positions in companies intimately connected to Vailtech, our suppliers, our integration partners, even a smaller competitor. Individually, each stake was small enough to avoid triggering disclosure requirements. But collectively, according to Clara's meticulous analysis, they painted a clear picture of a consolidation play. And the crucial missing piece, the linchpin that would complete their entire strategic structure, was a controlling interest in Vailtech itself. If someone held Vailtech's board voting rights, Clara explained, combined with these other positions, they would effectively control a significant portion of the enterprise infrastructure market in the Pacific region. That, Isabella, is a 9-figure play, at a minimum. I sat with that staggering number for a long, quiet time. Then I picked up the phone, called Liam, and told him I'd given it a great deal of thought. Yes, I concluded, this spring would indeed be a beautiful time for a wedding. I had, in fact, already begun planning something else entirely. The engagement announcement came in January. By February, I had, through a private investigations firm called Meridian Group, operated by a former FBI financial crimes analyst named Detective Sergeant Miller, whom Asha Sharma, my late father's corporate counsel, had utilized on 3 separate occasions and trusted implicitly, a comprehensive understanding of the Blackwoods' true intentions. The document they expected me to sign before the wedding was no ordinary prenuptial agreement. It was, as Detective Sergeant Miller detailed in his report, an intricately crafted asset transfer instrument designed to mimic standard estate planning. Within its clauses, my shares in Vailtech were transferred into a trust. The crucial board voting rights tied to those shares were also moved. Even my grandmother's estate, a picturesque property in Bavaria that my father had inherited and I had technically owned since his passing, was listed as collateral. Everything that conferred upon me the title of CEO would be signed away into a structure I couldn't control, and from which I couldn't exit without Blackwood Capital's explicit consent. This isn't a prenup, Isabella, Asha declared, her voice as precise and unembellished as it always was, when I presented the document to her. She had served as my father's lawyer for 19 years and mine for the last 18 months. This is a corporate acquisition, meticulously disguised as a marriage contract. If you signed this, you would walk out of that wedding as Liam Blackwood's wife. And wake up the following morning as Vailteca's former CEO. I know, I replied. When did they give it to you? They haven't, I clarified. I found it. In Liam's home office. I photographed every single page. Asha peered at me over her reading glasses for a moment. You went through his office? I went through his office. She almost, smiled. It was a very particular, subtle almost smile she reserved for moments when she was genuinely pleased but didn't wish to encourage overt recklessness. Good, she finally said. Now, let's discuss our next steps, and how much time we have. We had 4 months. The wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in June. The Vailtec board vote on a proposed merger was conveniently slated for the morning of the wedding, presumably to be decided while I was otherwise occupied. Detective Sergeant Miller's 42-page report vividly detailed how 3 board members, receiving undisclosed payments from Blackwood Capital, were ready to cast their votes at 10 a.m. So, we had 4 months. 4 months to construct an unassailable case, to meticulously document every payment, every email, every phone call. 4 months to build a legal challenge that would be utterly beyond dispute on the morning of a wedding I had no intention of allowing to be a wedding. I kept the engagement ring gleaming on my finger. I continued attending Sunday lunches, maintaining a placid smile across the table from Eleanor Blackwood, allowing her to redirect my attempts to discuss company governance toward superficial debates about floral centerpieces. Because every week she believed I was a docile, manageable fiancé was another week I gained to meticulously gather what I needed. My father had always imparted a crucial lesson: the most potent advantage in any negotiation is to be underestimated. I had been underestimated my entire adult life. By now, I was exceptionally skilled at it. 4 weeks before the wedding, I hired a security systems technician named David Chen. Bonded, licensed, with 16 years of experience in private residential security, he was tasked with installing a concealed camera in the cathedral's bridal suite. The suite would be used on the wedding morning for final preparations. Asha had quietly mentioned weeks prior, if they're going to pressure you to sign, it'll happen that morning. No witnesses, intense time pressure, somewhere private. Be prepared. I was prepared. David installed the camera at 4 a.m. on the Monday leading up to the wedding. Its lens, no larger than a thumbnail, was discreetly embedded in the decorative molding above the vanity mirror. It fed a continuous, encrypted stream to a receiver housed in my car, parked 2 blocks away, constantly monitored by Detective Sergeant Miller's team. David ran a test feed to my phone. It was crystal clear. The angle perfectly encompassed the entire room. On the morning of the wedding, precisely as Asha had foreseen, Eleanor arrived at the bridal suite at 7:45 a.m., while my makeup artist was still meticulously working. Eleanor waited patiently until the artist stepped out to retrieve additional supplies, a pause that, in hindsight, was almost certainly orchestrated. Then, she settled gracefully across from me at the vanity, placing the familiar document on the cool marble surface between us. It's merely a formality, she stated, her voice a deceptive warmth, like the glint of a polished blade catching the light just right. Liam wishes to have these legalities resolved before the ceremony. You understand, of course? Of course, I replied, my tone equally pleasant. You'll want to review it. I've already reviewed it, I countered smoothly. I found it in Liam's desk back in February. I've had 4 months. The artificial warmth in her face receded, but only by the precise amount she permitted, no more. She was, I conceded, remarkably controlled. Sign it, Isabella, she commanded. Or the photographs go to the press tonight. The affair, the emails. We possess ample evidence to remove you from the board before Monday's vote. Once you're out, there will be nothing left for you to return to. I met her gaze across the marble vanity, illuminated by the soft light of the bridal suite mirror. Photographs of an affair I didn't have? I inquired. Fabricated? Yes, she confirmed, without even a flicker. Convincingly so. The emails were particularly well crafted. Our tech team is thorough. By the time the truth emerges, if it ever does, the board vote will be concluded, and the merger will be irrevocably filed. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. And if I don't sign? Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. Then my son will ensure you are reminded that this decision carries significant consequences. 20 minutes later, Liam made good on that chilling promise. He entered the suite alone, closing the door firmly behind him. When I calmly informed him I wouldn't be signing anything, he drew his hand back and struck me hard across the left side of my face. It wasn't a casual slap, but a deliberate backhand. The heavy ring on his right hand connected with my cheekbone, tearing my lip against my own teeth. I stood there for a moment, tasting my own blood, as Liam adjusted the lapels of his tuxedo jacket, utterly composed. "Sign the document, Isabella," he said, his voice flat and calm, as if this violence was merely a routine procedure. "Or this is just the beginning." I wiped my mouth, my eyes fixed on him. And then I did the one thing he clearly hadn't anticipated. I said nothing at all. I simply picked up the pen he had left on the vanity, walked to the door, and called my makeup artist back in. 20 minutes after that, I was walking down the aisle, a flash drive concealed within my bouquet, my blood staining a smear on his cufflink, and Detective Sergeant Miller watching a live feed from a parking garage 2 blocks away. When the gold pen snapped in my hands, the sharp crack resonated through the 300 guests like a sudden gunshot. Liam's frozen smile, an arrested mask of smugness, was the most honest expression I had ever witnessed on his face. Beneath it, for a fleeting fraction of a second, before his practiced control reasserted itself, was a raw recalculation, a look I'd seen in the bridal suite. I didn't afford him the luxury of finishing that thought. I walked directly to the pastor's podium. Father Michael, a kind, elderly man who had married my parents 34 years prior, had been quietly briefed by Asha 2 nights before on the coming events. He had agreed, with what I could only describe as quiet, righteous calm, to step aside. Without hesitation, I inserted the flash drive into the projector port on the podium's media panel. The 20-foot projection screen towering behind the altar blazed to life. The hidden camera above the bridal suite vanity had recorded with remarkable clarity. The timestamp in the corner read 7:52 a.m., precisely an hour and 3 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Eleanor Blackwood was clearly visible at the vanity, leaning forward, sliding the nefarious document across the marble surface. "My son is not marrying a useless, weeping heiress with inconvenient legal opinions," Eleanor's voice boomed through the cathedral speakers, the clipped, precise tone exactly as I'd heard it across dozens of Sunday lunches. "We need the voting rights transferred and filed by 10 o'clock. Sign it, or the photographs go out tonight." A collective sound, like a held breath exhaling all at once, swept through the 300 guests. Then Liam appeared on screen. The camera had captured his entrance perfectly, the custom tuxedo, the door closing behind him, the deliberate, menacing stillness before he spoke. "You don't even comprehend what your father painstakingly built," Liam's recorded voice sneered. "You inherited power by pure accident. Sign it, Isabella, or this is just the beginning." On screen, his hand drew back, and the impact landed with chilling precision. The sound, flawlessly captured by the camera's microphone, reverberated through the cathedral speakers with a stark clarity that made several women in the front rows recoil. Actual screams, not mere gasps, erupted. A senator's wife clapped a hand over her mouth. 2 of Liam's groomsmen exchanged a look that bespoke a desperate scramble to find the fastest, most inconspicuous exit. The real Liam, standing just 3 feet from me at the altar, lunged for the projector cord. He moved with a startling speed, clearly having prepared for some unforeseen contingency. But he never reached it. My security detail, 2 former Metropolitan Police officers, Reynolds and Kim, who had been discreetly positioned as ushers since 7 that morning, another brilliant idea from Asha, stepped forward simultaneously, intercepting him with cold, efficient professionalism, entirely devoid of drama. Liam crumpled to his knees. Not because he was forced, but voluntarily, collapsing before the 300 smartphone cameras now unanimously pointed at him. His face recomposed in real time, shifting into something that looked impressively like profound devastation. "It's a deep fake," he choked out, his voice cracking on cue. She's been struggling mentally. She's been having episodes. I would never." His voice broke completely. He pressed a hand to his face. "I love this woman. I would never hurt her." And here was the terrifying truth, the genuinely unsettling realization I'd been warned about, but which still felt like swallowing ice in that very moment. It almost worked. I watched the room waver. I watched 300 people, who had just witnessed and heard a video of this man striking me, begin to look at one another with a fresh uncertainty. His performance was flawless. The tears, whether genuine or sufficiently convincing, streamed down his face. And he was correct about one thing: the ingrained instinct in these rooms, in circles like these, among men like these, is still to gravitate toward the narrative where the weeping man is the victim. He slowly rose from his knees, his arms open in a gesture of wounded vulnerability. He walked toward me across the altar steps, and his voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible, intended only for my ears. This small detail told me everything about how absolutely certain he still was of his victory. "I win," he breathed. "They'll always believe the man." I met his gaze. I allowed him to approach, close enough to be absolutely convinced I was defeated. Then, I stepped to the microphone. "Deepfakes are incredibly convincing," I acknowledged, my voice remarkably steady, steadier than I ever thought it could be, steadier than I had any right to expect. "I'll grant you that. But they possess one fatal flaw." I turned, my gaze sweeping toward the rear of the cathedral. "They don't leave DNA. Detective Sergeant Hayes, a compact man of 61 with the demeanor of someone who had heard every permutation of every story since 2009 and no longer surprised by any of them, had been with the Metropolitan Police Financial Crimes Unit for 19 years before transitioning 6 years ago to a specialized joint task force targeting corporate fraud and coercive financial crimes. He now advanced unhurriedly from the side aisle, methodically pulling on a pair of nitrile gloves with the practiced ease of countless repetitions. "Extend your right arm, Mr. Blackwood," he instructed. Liam froze. This wasn't the theatrical stillness from moments earlier, this was a genuine, physiological arrest, the kind that grips a body before the mind fully comprehends. Officers Reynolds and Kim moved in simultaneously. Liam's right arm, as if compelled, came forward. Detective Sergeant Hayes reached for the tuxedo sleeve and smoothly pushed it back, revealing the monogrammed, custom gold cufflink, emblazoned with the Blackwood family crest, exactly the sort of ostentatious statement piece that costs a fortune. There, caught precisely in the setting where the face of the cufflink met its post, was a crimson smear. Small, precise, and unequivocally real. My blood. Liam had meticulously cleaned his hands after the bridal suite, but he hadn't considered his cufflink. People who inflict harm in haste rarely consider such minute details. Detective Sergeant Hayes carefully bagged the cufflink with the quiet efficiency of a professional whose job it is to ensure small, critical pieces of evidence survive to bear witness later. The cathedral's massive wooden doors swung open, not dramatically, but with the weighty presence of large doors simply being pulled. Then, people streamed through, moving swiftly. The suits they wore bore two letters that, in my experience, are the most clarifying sight a room full of wedding guests could ever witness. Asha Sharma was among them, walking with the determined stride of someone who had waited all morning for this precise moment. 44 years old, my father's corporate counsel, and now mine, she wore a sharp charcoal blazer and carried a leather briefcase. I knew it contained, among other things, 47 pages of forensic accounting documentation, 18 months of subpoenaed email records, and a formal SEC filing that had gone live at 9:55 that very morning. She paused at the altar steps, regarding Liam Blackwood with the calm, assessing gaze one reserves for a problem already solved. There was almost a flicker of relief in her eyes. "I trust you remember me," she stated, her voice even. "From the encrypted emails you attempted to delete from your firm's server at 3:07 a.m. last Tuesday." She then turned to Eleanor, seated in the front pew in her ivory silk. "The Blackwood Capital accounts are currently frozen by an SEC emergency order, effective this morning. The diamonds you are wearing were acquired using funds now under federal review." Asha extended her hand. "Please remove them." Eleanor's fingers, still encased in their lace gloves, still perfectly composed until this precise second, visibly trembled as she slowly reached up and unclasped her necklace. She dropped it into Asha's waiting palm without lifting her gaze. Liam lurched forward, pushing past officers Reynolds and Kim. This time, his target wasn't me, but the 5 board members seated in the second and third pews. His final gambit, I realized, his absolute last card. "The board meeting started at 10 o'clock, he shouted, desperation raw in his voice. "My people are voting right now. The merger resolution. You can't stop it. It's in session. You still lose the company." I looked at the board members. "Check your phones," I instructed. All 5 simultaneously pulled out their devices, with the swift obedience people exhibit when an authoritative voice makes a specific, urgent demand. Detective Sergeant Miller's 42-page forensic accounting report, explicitly naming the 3 compromised board members, meticulously documenting their illicit payments from Blackwood Capital, and formally recommending their immediate suspension pending investigation, had been uploaded to Vailteca's secure board portal at 9:55 a.m. Per the emergency protocol Asha and I had filed 3 days earlier, the company council had automatically suspended the voting rights of the 3 affected board members upon publication, leaving the remaining board without the necessary quorum to proceed on the merger resolution. The merger vote was thus suspended. The resolution was invalid. It would be formally terminated, Asha informed me later that afternoon, within 48 hours. I watched Liam as this new reality washed over him. I watched it seep through every layer of his charm, his carefully constructed performance, every inch of the man who had strode into that cathedral, utterly convinced that the conclusion of this entire story belonged to him. "You used me," he uttered, his voice now flat, hollow, all pretense finally exhausted. I took a step closer, near enough to deliver my next words softly. Not to deny him an audience, but because some truths resonate with far greater power at a low volume. "I began planning this," I revealed, "the week your mother casually threatened my housekeeper for parking in the wrong spot. I continued when your assistant made Zara cry in the parking garage over a simple scheduling question. I remained engaged even after I found that document in your desk, because by then, I understood precisely what I was up against, and I needed the time to construct something that couldn't be easily dismantled." I held his gaze for another moment. "The engagement was your trap," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The wedding, Liam, was mine." I dropped my torn veil onto the altar table, letting it fall beside the shattered gold pen. The ending, I declared, is mine. Detective Sergeant Hayes stepped forward. Federal agents materialized from both sides of the aisle. Liam was escorted, firmly and efficiently, with the kind of professionalism that requires no overt force when the necessity for it has already been nullified, toward the cathedral doors. Eleanor followed, also escorted, her lace gloves now folded in her lap, her ivory silk still immaculate, but her diamonds now resting securely in Asha's briefcase. They walked down the velvet aisle, retracing the exact path that had been prepared for my wedding procession, past every white petal, every flickering candle, every lily from the florist I had been told I simply had to use. 300 guests watched in stunned silence, phones raised, mouths agape, without a single trace of laughter. The sound system was still on. I reached over and switched it off. The cathedral fell into a profound quiet. Liam Blackwood was subsequently charged with assault, causing grievous bodily harm, coercive control, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. His arraignment took place 3 weeks after the non-wedding. He wore a suit, which, according to Zara, who attended because she had rightfully earned the privilege, was significantly less well-fitted than his tuxedo. Eleanor Blackwood was charged separately with conspiracy, securities manipulation, and, based on the bridal suite recording, criminal intimidation. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea in a voice Zara described as slightly less confident than expected, given the circumstances. 3 board members resigned before Asha even formally moved to have them removed. The 4th board member remained and fully cooperated with the SEC investigation. The 5th, who had never been compromised, called me personally on the afternoon of the wedding to convey 2 things, his regret for not seeing what was happening sooner, and his intention to vote against the merger, now formally defunct, purely for the sake of the record. I assured him the record already held more than enough. Detective Sergeant Miller's report became, in Asha's words, a model of forensic documentation that she intended to reference in all future cases. She delivered this assessment in her characteristic flat, unadorned manner, which, when Asha expresses pride, is exactly how she does it. I accepted it in the same spirit. 6 months after the wedding, Clara Jensen, the financial analyst who had first illuminated the Blackwood portfolio consolidation strategy for me, published a comprehensive paper on coercive acquisition tactics in mid-market tech. She chose not to name names. She didn't need to, the case had been a very public spectacle for months. Vail Tech experienced its best quarter in 6 years in July, the month after the wedding. I presented the results to the board in person, at a table where every seat was occupied by someone who had genuinely earned their place. And when it was time to sign, no one dared to try and take the pen from my hand. My father's company is still my father's company. And it is still, most profoundly, mine.